What is justice, eh? It's a simple question, but the answer is anything but. We grapple with it constantly, in big ways and small. Think about the heated debates that fill our headlines. Contentious topics like financial bailouts for banks, the ethics of surrogate motherhood, or assisted suicide. These aren't just political squabbles, they are fundamentally questions about what is the right thing to do. A few years ago, I took an online course by Michael Sandel called Justice, which later became the basis for his book, Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? It's a compelling journey into moral philosophy, and it uses these very real, modern dilemmas to unpack how we think about justice. The book suggests that our ideas about what's just usually stem from one of three core principles: maximizing welfare, respecting freedom, or promoting virtue. So, welfare, freedom, or virtue. Let's break that down. The first approach is about welfare, most famously represented by utilitarianism. This philosophy, championed by thinkers like Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, argues that the most just action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. It's a pragmatic approach. The problem, however, is that it tries to find a universal unit of value to measure everything, even things that are incredibly difficult to assign a number to, like human life or dignity. Then there's the idea that justice is about freedom. This camp is broad, covering everyone from libertarians like Milton Friedman and Robert Nozick to Immanuel Kant. The core idea here is that justice means respecting individual rights and the choices free people make. The debate, of course, is about what that freedom actually entails. Is it just the freedom from interference, or does it require certain conditions to be met for a choice to be truly free? This brings up an unsettling question. How much of our choice is ever truly free, considering the lottery of birth that defines our talents, families, and starting positions in life? Finally, there's justice as virtue. This is an older idea, most famously associated with Aristotle. This perspective argues that a just society is one that cultivates and honors the virtues and character traits that make up a good life. It doesn't shy away from making judgments about what is good and what is bad. Justice isn't just a matter of calculation or consent. It's about what it means to be a good person and a good citizen. As you look at these different philosophies, another dividing line appears. Is justice about the process or about the outcome? On one side, you have what you could call a procedural view of justice. This idea suggests that as long as we all agree on a fair set of rules beforehand, the rules of the game, then whatever result comes from it is, by definition, just. This approach tries to be value neutral. It focuses on principles like freedom or equality as the foundation for the rules, and it avoids getting bogged down in messy debates about what is morally good or bad. On the other side is a more substantive view, which insists that you can't just ignore the moral value of the outcome. From this perspective, justice requires us to actually evaluate whether the result itself is good or bad. It is apparent that Sandel leans towards the second camp, which has its roots in Aristotle's way of thinking. There's an argument to be made that we need to reintroduce clear moral values back into our public discourse and maybe even our laws, instead of pretending we can have a completely neutral conversation. Because when you try to apply these supposedly value-neutral systems to real moral dilemmas, you can end up in some absurd places. Often it's simply impossible to avoid making a value judgment. Let's take a closer look at one of the giants of the freedom camp, Immanuel Kant. His moral system is incredibly complex, but it's built on a very abstract idea of freedom. While it's internally consistent, if you follow its logic to the end, it can lead to some very strange conclusions. For example, Kant argues that for an action to have any moral worth, it must be done out of a sense of duty, even if it goes against your own desires. If you help someone simply because it makes you feel good, that's nice, but it's not a moral act in his view. The moral value comes from acting out of respect for a universal moral law. But this raises a difficult question. Where does that sense of duty come from? If our feeling of ought is just another impulse we didn't freely choose, then even acting from duty loses its moral character by Kant's own logic. The space for genuine morality becomes vanishingly small, dependent on a level of pure freedom that we may not actually possess. It's a rigid system, and it struggles when it collides with the messiness of human life. Another towering figure is John Rawls, who offers a different take on a fair system. He asks us to imagine a thought experiment. What principles of justice would we agree to if we were all behind a veil of ignorance? Behind this veil, you don't know who you will be in society. You don't know your class, your gender, your race, your talents, or even your conception of what makes a good life. Rawls argues that from this original position of equality, we would agree on certain principles of justice. From this perspective, the natural inequalities we are born with, our talents, our health, our family advantages, are not inherently just or unjust. They are simply neutral facts. Justice or injustice arises from how the system, the basic structure of society, chooses to deal with these facts. Crucially for Rawls, what you are entitled to is based on the legitimate expectations created by the rules of the system. It's not based on what you feel you morally deserve. He separates what is just under a fair system from our personal ideas of moral desert. It's a system built on facts, on how things are, rather than on contested moral claims. Now, how can we apply these grand theories? I find myself unable to imagine how we could implement a single value-based system at a national or federal level without it causing more harm than good. This is where the ideas of another thinker, Nassim Taleb, resonate with me. Taleb distinguishes between the different levels of human community. Perhaps the rules of justice that apply to our family and close-knit neighbours should be different from the rules that govern our relationship with the state or with strangers. It seems acceptable that on these closer, more local levels, our rights and duties can come from sources other than just abstract reason or individual consent. They can also arise from our community, our shared history, and our role within that group. A person might hold different yet valid approaches to what is just, depending on the context of their relationships. And this brings me to a final lingering thought. It seems that all the great, all-encompassing moral systems, when followed with perfect consistency, ultimately lead to absurd conclusions. The most famous example is from Kant, who concluded that lying to a murderer at your door to protect a friend hiding inside is an immoral act. This is where these grand theories can feel brittle and unsatisfying. They often don't seem to account for the intensity of a moral or immoral act. Surely not all immoral acts are equally immoral. So we are left with this deep and difficult challenge. We have to navigate these questions of justice, but the philosophical maps we have, while brilliant, don't always seem to match the terrain of real life. Perhaps there is no single elegant system. Perhaps justice is something we must constantly build, debate, and redefine in all the different communities we are a part of.